And the Oscar goes to Dances with Wolves, Jim Wilson and Kevin Costner.
March 25th, 1991, at the 63rd Annual Academy Awards was a night that Kevin Costner will never forget. The night that not only did his movie Dances with Wolves win the Best Picture, but also nabbed him a Best Director Oscar as well. 2 Academy Awards for an actor who had really slowly but surely began to make his presence known, and this was his vindication that he had arrived in Hollywood as one of the biggest draws in the business. What would follow after that was 3 Golden Globe Awards and a Primetime Emmy Award over the next 30-plus years. Costner has been in the business for a long period of time. He began his career in 1978, only rising to prominence in such blockbusters and classic movies as The Untouchables, Bull Durham, Field of Dreams, you name it. After Dances with Wolves, his golden streak continued into the 1990s with films with appearances in critically acclaimed and box office hits JFK, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, The Bodyguard, A Perfect World, and Wyatt Earp. This is a guy that had done a lot of different movies over the course of his career, and that night with Dances with Wolves was probably the best night of his career, honestly, when you really think about it. And at that point, he probably felt like he could pretty much do whatever he wanted, and the studios would have to abide by it, and he would have that same kind of success he had with Dances with Wolves. Yeah, that probably didn't work out as well as I think he wanted it to. Now, before I keep going, I want to clarify specifically that I have nothing against Kevin Costner as a whole. I think he is a terrific actor. I mean, the list of movies that he's been in is just a perfect example of how much this guy has had a strong reputation in Hollywood. The movies I just mentioned, there's movies that I haven't mentioned, great stuff like The Big Chill, Testament, Silverado, Fandango, No Way Out, Bull Durham, Revenge. I think I mentioned Bull Durham before. Tin Cup, The War. There's been a lot of movies where he has been really, really good in. Even to this very day, he's made some great movies in general. And the guy is still a relatively damn good actor. Like, no matter how you put it, the guy still knows what he's doing. But in terms of picking some pretty good movies, this video in particular is going to be talking about some of his biggest gambles. And, honestly, when you think about it, Dances with Wolves was a gigantic gamble back in the 1990 season, the award season, if you will, because it was a movie that, it was one of those movies where Costner had put a lot of effort into it. He bought the rights to this book called Stacy's Nights, which was eventually which was published in 1988, and Costner and his producing partner Jim Wilson had difficulty in raising money for the film, especially when you consider that this was being released by Orion Pictures, who at that time was beginning its slow descent into bankruptcy. And it was mostly turned down by a lot of the studios because the Western genre wasn't popular at that point, following what happened with Heaven's Gate at the beginning of the decade. But the project languished at various studios, including Nelson Entertainment Island Pictures, because of the budgets, and essentially Costner was able to get a deal with Orion Pictures, and it was one of the things that helped that studio stay alive even during its darkest years. I mean, it's hard to believe with something like Orion Pictures, when they had that and the Silence of the Lambs winning Best Picture back-to-back years. This was around the time when the studio was nearing the end of its run as a studio because they just couldn't get the financial stability, despite the fact they had just produced 2 Best Picture winners in a row. And there were still movies that they had produced in that bankruptcy era that were still considered Oscar contenders. I mean, Jessica Lange won an Academy Award for a movie that she did. That was essentially a film that was delayed because of the bankruptcy of Orion Pictures. And yeah, it was a pretty big gamble for Kevin Costner and Orion Pictures that did eventually pay off in the long run. And, Kevin Costner could pretty much, like I said, do whatever he wanted at that point because he had just made Dances with Wolves, and he was seen as a reliable box office draw. And this is when it gets interesting, if you will, because join me now in 1994 in a theoretical situation here. It's 1994, Kevin Costner had just finished making A Perfect World. Maybe not the big financial hit, but it was a critically praised movie in general. And so he decides to go, and so he and his buddies are in town. His buddies are in town, and Costner decides to go out for a night in the town. And his buddies decide, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's just go to Las Vegas and just have a good time. Let's go out to the casinos. Let's go ahead and gamble away. Let's put our money out there and see if we can what we could do there. And Costner sees an opportunity and decides to put a lot of money into one specific thing. He says, you know what, I'm going to take $20 million and put it on this wonderful project called Rapa Nui. It's directed by the same man that made Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It was a movie that Costner produced, and kind of like with Dances with Wolves, this was a film that was essentially one that Costner and Reynolds really believed in, and thought that this was going to be the next big thing. And they put $20 million on it. Warner Brothers released it in September of '94, and the film crashed and burned badly. They put $20 million into it, not to mention all the money towards the marketing, and it only brought back in an abysmal $305,000 at the box office. And not only that, it was seen on many lists of the worst movies of 1994, and it essentially, bottom line was that it was not a big success. And okay, so it was one bad movie that came out with Costner putting a lot of money into it. Not a big deal. There was a little bit more of a big deal with maybe say Wyatt Earp, but even then, Wyatt Earp wasn't a flop either. But it certainly was a lot more profitable than something like Rapa Nui. But at the same time, though, it still wasn't a hit in general. But most people forgot about that once Rapa Nui came out. So it's now 1 year later in 1995, and the buddies decide to go out to Vegas once again with Costner and say, you know what, we didn't do very well the first time around, so we're going to do it again. We're going to have another good time here, and this time we're finally going to go in there and really put our all into it. And then Costner brings what could be his next is the project that will eventually bring him back to glory after the year of 1994 that he had, and that was a project called Waterworld. The most expensive film made at the time, Waterworld was set to be a blockbuster unlike anything he had ever done at that point. A movie that had a high budget of $175 million. It was a movie that essentially Kevin Costner was basically reunited with the guy that had one of his biggest successes early in the year with in the decade with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and then you had Rapa Nui, which may have begun a little bit of the conflict between both Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds, the director of the movie, because Kevin Reynolds quit the film before its release, only to heated battles with Costner over his creative differences. Reynolds technically was still given the full credit as the director, and they didn't talk to one another until almost 2 decades later, when they eventually worked again on Hatfield and McCoy's. But we'll get to that one in a little bit. But the movie essentially there was a lot on the line for it. 1995, you got to remember, movies that cost $175 million would be the equivalent of a $300 million movie nowadays. Like, that was pretty big money in 1995. So if this thing was going to be profitable in any way, shape, or form, it had to make nearly 3 times that budget back. And in 1995, that was going to be really hard to do. And in fact, most people were already considering the film to be an expensive flop from the get-go, with some critics dubbing it as Fish Star, Kevin's Gate, as a homage to the classic bombs Ishtar and Heaven's Gate. The film opened at number 1 in the box office, but unfortunately, it only brought in $264 million off of a $175 million budget. It made its money back. It may have made the budget back, but Universal probably was expecting a whole lot more, considering, let's think about this. They had the toys coming out. They had the video game coming out. They were setting this up as the next big franchise. They had a show at Universal Studios Hollywood set to go. And this film didn't, this was a big flop for Kevin Costner at the time. But as time went on, thanks to home video and TV airings, along with other revenue streaming, especially with the theme park attraction still going strong even to this very day, the film did eventually find a profit. So it did eventually find a way to get its money. But back then, yeah, it was seen as another costly gamble for Kevin Costner in general. And it didn't look good for him back then. But like I said, that movie did eventually find its way in terms of making money. So where do you go from there if you're Kevin Costner? I mean, he did go on to make a movie, Tin Cup, which did become a profitable hit, both critically and financially. But then 2 years after that, the friends decide is Kevin calls up his friends and say, "Hey, I feel like going to the casino again. What do you want? What do you guys think?" And even Costner's friends is just like, "Yeah, Kevin, listen, buddy, we've been there the 2 times in a row, and we haven't made a single dime. And you put way too much money into these things. We're just gonna we're not really interested in going to the casino right now." And Kevin Costner basically just said, "All right, well, screw you guys. I'm heading out to Las Vegas." He heads to Las Vegas, and he's got $80 million on a project called The Postman, a post-apocalyptic neo-Western version of the disestablished United States in the then-future year of 2013, only 16 years away. 16 plus years after unspecified apocalyptic events followed by plagues left a huge impact on human civilization and erased most technology. This is a movie that was based off of a book at the time of its release, and Costner, this time he had control of it. He was not only the star and the producer, but he was also the director as well. So a lot of the film success was riding on him. This was another one of those movies where he really believed that he had to show everybody that he could still be that same guy he was at the beginning of the decade, even though Waterworld was a film that backfired big time. And so, it really wasn't a good sign that the film performed pretty badly at 2 test screenings, and Warner Brothers actually asked him to edit the film down from its 3-hour runtime, to which Costner refused. And, not surprisingly, the film bombed badly. An $80 million movie only brought in $30 million, and lost once again, losing a lot of money for not just Costner, but also the studio as well. It also didn't help that the film opened up on the weekend that, opened 6 days after Titanic just took over the box office and never went back. And, this film quickly became forgotten, unless you watched The Simpsons in 1999, of course.
Ooh, I hear this really sucks. Director's commentary.
I'm sorry. I am really sorry. Ugh! I don't know what I was thinking. But, Field of Dreams was good, wasn't it? Made us all believe again.
Oh, poor Mr. Costner. He tries so hard.
Aw, thanks. You're sweet to say that.
Where are you?
I'm back here. Hi. Will you bring me a sandwich? Please? No crusts.
Those 3 movies I mentioned, Rapa Nui, Waterworld, The Postman, combining all that together, all those movies cost over $270 million to make. And they did not make any of that money back at all at that time. And, Kevin Costner pretty much decided to take a step back a little bit and just decide to do what he did before Dances with Wolves and just take whatever movie he could find and hopefully find success again. And it's not for the lack of trying. He did have some movies that were that got critical praise, did decent numbers, but were mostly forgettable. Stuff like Message in a Bottle, For the Love of the Game, 13 Days, 3,000 Miles to Graceland, Dragonfly. And then he eventually found his way back in the director's chair with another movie that he wanted to make, another Western film in Open Range. The film was based off of a book called The Open Range Men, and it also starred Annette Bening, Michael Gambon, and Michael Jeter. And this was a movie that Costner decided to do again. But unlike his other movies, he took a very conservative decision. He made a very conservative decision and decided to make it a $22 million budgeted movie. And it actually worked out for him, because not only did the movie receive a lot of critical praise, but it turned out to be a pretty big hit at the box office, making $68 million worldwide, essentially making a profit of nearly 3 times its budget. So, and the film is really good. It's a really good Western. And even somebody like me who doesn't really like a whole lot of Westerns, I actually found the film very enjoyable. So he would have these, and he did have a couple of critically acclaimed performances and stuff in movies that were actually really good. Stuff like The Upside of Anger, underrated gems like Rumor Has It, movies like Mr. Brooks, Swing Vote, and then there is even films that weren't that great, but at least were ambitious. The Guardian, Swing Vote, The Company Men. The guy, and it was around this time that his career really began to elevate to another level with 2012's appearance in Hatfield to McCoy's, which was heavily marketed as the first History Channel scripted miniseries in which he appeared with Bill Paxton in the famous story about the infamous feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys. It was also a miniseries where Costner and director Kevin Reynolds would eventually reconcile and work together again. The miniseries went on to become a hit, receiving a lot of good, high critical praise, and it was the one where Kevin Costner won an Emmy for his performance in the miniseries. And essentially, it brought him to a new level of his career and kind of back to relevancy. Because after that, he would star in movies like Man of Steel, Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit, Draft Day, Black or White, McFarlane USA, Hidden Figures, The Highwaymen, The Art of Racing in the Rain. He was back on top again, and he found himself catapulted to even more to superstardom thanks to his success on the TV series Yellowstone, which was again kind of seen as a big gamble when you think about what the network it was on, Paramount Network. Which at the time, there was a point when they were literally going to make Paramount Network become a movie network, essentially scrapping all the original projects they had. And Yellowstone was the one that not only survived, but it eventually took off in a way that I don't think anybody at that company, at Paramount, or even Kevin Costner really thought it was going to be, because the show really did take off. It won high praise by critics. It's still considered one of the highest rated shows on cable television. The last season that it had, back in season 5, was watched by as many as close to 10 million viewers. I mean, that's how popular this show was. Like, cable shows like this don't get those high numbers like a show like this does. And like I said, this was coming from a time when Paramount Network was literally on the cusp of changing over strictly to a movie network in general, and essentially knocking out its entire original content. But Yellowstone has been the one thing that has stayed strong over the course of the series' entire run. But this also leads to the last part of our story, because Kevin Costner finds success with Yellowstone. He is basically given a whole lot of, he's given pretty much free range to do whatever he wants at this point, because he's now at a point now where he could pretty much do whatever he wanted to do. And so, he's in the middle of this TV show, but there's one project that he's been having in the back of his mind that he just feels like he has to get named. This is a project that he'd been wanting to do all the way back into the 1980s, and that is a project called Horizon: An American Saga. Horizon: An American Saga was first originally believed to be a film that Costner wanted to do as a single film in 1988, and later approached Disney with the project after the release of his film Open Range in 2003. And then Costner essentially took the project over to Warner Brothers, and then essentially that's how this project eventually became what it eventually became, because the film went from being a single film storyline to a movie that spans over the course of multiple movies. And he planned to make 4 movies out of the premise and was looking to cast over 170 different speaking roles. But there's just one problem with the whole thing. It contradicts with his work on Yellowstone. So, he decided to. He could have done one of two things. He could have stayed on Yellowstone, continue doing what made him the success that he is, helped the successful revitalization of his career at that point. Or take another big gamble, something that he hadn't done in nearly 30 years, on this project called Horizon: An American Saga. Guess what he did? Left Yellowstone in the dust. He left the show, and essentially the series is now on the cusp of going off the air because Costner decided to leave the show in general, and it's now going to continue through various other shows. But more on that in just a second, because it'd been a couple of years since Costner took a huge gamble on a project like this, so he decided to do something that he hadn't done in years. Head back to Vegas and essentially put it all on this movie, because he was putting up $100 million of his own money, and essentially bringing in other studio bringing in Warner Brothers to help fund the rest of the first 3 films to get it made. However, he needs to make a 4th film, and Costner essentially needed more money to make that movie. So he was hoping long and hard that these first 2 movies were going to be monster hits. They were going to be the movies that were going to define his legacy and create his vision of his passion project of his. And he was hoping that the success of the first 2 movies would be the thing that would get this 4th movie made. And Yeah, needless to say, that has not been the case, because their first big mistake was opening this movie over at the Cannes Film Festival. Or the Venice Film Festival, because as we saw last year with some movies such as... No, it was the Cannes Film Festival, I'm sorry. That's the second movie that's going to be premiering at the Venice Film Festival this September. But kind of like what we saw last year when Disney decided to put Elemental and Indiana Jones out at the Cannes Film Festival, the early word of mouth was not very good, and that eventually came back to hurt those films at the box office at first. And the critical reviews for Horizon were not very good. In fact, in May, after the Cannes Film Festival, the reviews were pretty bad, starting off at 20%. And then also the box office anticipation for this was not very good either, as at the time the film was projected to make somewhere between $10 to $11 million, which is not good for a movie that cost $100 million to make. The reviews got better as the release date came closer, but not enough to save the film in the long run. This movie flopped badly, lost out to A Quiet Place Day One, only brought in $11 million, and ended up making only $32 million, which, even if Wikipedia says the budget is only $50 million, it's still not good for this movie. This film that was supposed to be the beginning of this grand epic that Costner had to make because he believed in it so much. Like, it was getting to the point that the way he was promoting this movie was almost the Flash levels of bad. Like, it's like when he was talking about Yellowstone ending, he was just like, well, I hope they invite me back on the show. It's just like, the reason why that show was ending is because you left to work on this project that looked boring from the beginning, had nothing about it whatsoever that was going to make it the hit that you think it was. Yeah, The Sound of Freedom made money in that same spot the year before, but just because you put a movie like that in a spot like that doesn't mean you're going to have that same effect, which I feel like that's what he wanted to have with this movie. But hey, you know what? That's okay. There's a second film coming on August 16th, which will be this Friday, and I'm looking on here, and it's actually not here. I don't know what it is, and I just realized that, yeah, because the first film was flopped badly, the second film's release got delayed, and they're waiting to see how it does on Max before eventually deciding to make their next move. Which I think is pretty hilarious, because once again, this is Kevin Costner wasting a lot of his money on a project that maybe he thought way too much of, to think that people were literally going to sit in the movie theater for 3 hours for 4 consecutive times and just totally accept this movie as it is. And yeah, that's not the case as it is. And I just feel like the whole point of making this video is because I just want Kevin Costner to just look. I've said at the beginning, I have nothing bad to say about Kevin Costner as a human being or an actor in general. I think he's made a lot of great movies and has proven that he is a well-warranted actor and somebody that definitely is somebody who deserves all the praise, all the attention that he gets. But when he takes these big gambles like this, he does this so many times over the course of the last 30 years. It's just like, at some point, you have to realize, you know, maybe I need to stop doing this to myself. And you're not the young guy that you were when you made Dances with Wolves. Is over 30 years ago, dude. You're reaching 70 years old in January. Like, it's like, if you really want to be that great director that you think you are, that great actor that you are, become the next Clint Eastwood. I mean, Clint Eastwood still makes movies, even though he's very much high into the 90s. Like, you're at the twilight of your years left in Hollywood. You still can be a draw in the Hollywood scene. Like, Clint Eastwood has made a lot of great movies, even at his old age. Some movies have not been that great, but most of his movies have been pretty good, even in his later years. Like, instead of wasting a ton of money on movies like Horizon and Waterworld and The Postman, maybe go for smaller movies. Maybe go for more movies that, like, I feel like if Horizon was just that one movie and had a much smaller budget than this does, this could have easily been a much better thing that would have worked out in his favor than what it's actually happening right now. I really am not sure that he's going to make all 4 of these movies, because at some point, Warner Brothers is going to come in and say, "Hey, listen, man, we can't keep funding this garbage if nobody's going to go and see it, because it's The Postman all over again. It's Waterworld all over again. It's Rapa Nui all over again. Just because everyone knows who you are doesn't mean that they're going to keep seeing everything you make, even when you put a ton of money into this, and it just doesn't feel like a film that is truly of your talents, and just feels like a film that you should have made on a much smaller scale and maybe at a younger age of your career. I'm just wishing and hoping that for the best for Costner at this point, but yeah, when I see him putting all this money into a project that he really thinks that is going to be a success, I couldn't help but laugh when I heard that that film got delayed. The second film in that series got delayed, but yeah, it's. I'm hoping for the best for Costner. Really, I hope that this is another. I hope that he finally has learned a valuable lesson in saying that maybe I should stop spending all my money on these movies that are clearly not going to make any money anytime soon. But then again, that's wishful thinking on my part. So, who knows? Maybe 10 years down the line, he'll try to do something like this again. But it's just time to take a break, man. Like, go back to doing smaller movies. Go back to becoming the actor that we know you could be. Like, stop wasting all that money of yours on these projects that are clearly not going to make anything. Is not going to make money in any way, shape, or form. I mean. But who knows? Maybe it'll turn around with the rest of the story of Horizon. Maybe the first film was bad, but maybe these next 3 films will turn it around. I sincerely doubt it, but who knows? It feels like I've been kind of rambling on here, but if you want to see me talk about another notorious era in Hollywood with David Putnam as the head of Columbia Pictures, go ahead and check out that video, as well as some of the other videos we've taken a look at. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening and watching.